Welcome to What the World Needs Now, sponsored by Harmony Academy from National University. In this episode, Tom Whisinnand and Josh Monroe talk with Perez, Ms.Rivera, and Ramon Benavides Jr., an inspirational group of Latinx educators who share their personal connections to immigrant students and talk about a chapter they co-authored in Hispanic Perspectives on Student Support and Community Empowerment by Dr. Angelo Villarreal.
All righty, welcome to What the World Needs Now, and we've got a super special episode for you, Tom. I don't think that we've ever sat down with 5 people ready to have an awesome discussion about education. Have we done that before?
Not that I know of. This is going to be incredible. And these people are absolutely amazing, passionate, inspirational individuals, Josh.
Ramon, Lee, Autumn, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. For our listeners that don't have the privilege of knowing who you are, could you take a minute, give us a little bit of an elevator pitch, if you will? Who are you? Where are you from? And what's your role in education?
Miss Autumn, go ahead.
I can start. I'm Autumn Rivera. I am a 6th grade science teacher in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. I just am in the middle of my 20th year of teaching middle school science. I am the 2022 Colorado State Teacher of the Year, finalist for National Teacher of the Year, and was just awarded a PAMST awardee this year. So that was very exciting. So it's been a great time in education, do a lot of advocacy work for education, specifically science education, and spend a lot of time getting to meet some awesome educators and work with some really fun students.
I'll go next. Ramon Benavides. I'm from El Paso, Texas. Originally from South Texas, the tip of Texas, southern tip of Texas. Here in El Paso by marriage. I've been in the education field, I want to say about 14 years. This is a year and a half into administration, high school administration. So I just recently left the classroom. First year was tough being away from the classroom, but now being able to expand a little bit more in who I can reach and who I can help. But I'm always been like Autumn is. I've always been an advocate for science. That's my passion. I still teach at our community college. I teach part-time any bio course you give me. And the 2022 Texas Teacher of the Year. And just recently, it hasn't been released yet, but I was just appointed as a Department of Defense STEM ambassador. So that should be starting up soon. That was a huge selection process. I went through some application process like we do. And I just found out in late December, but we can't share anything yet. But hopefully by the time this comes out, it'll already be shared.
Tom, we were just talking about that before we got the good old application process, right, Ramon? Those fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if it's worth doing, there's going to be an application. There's going to be a process. You're going to have to put in a little bit of time. Ramon, congratulations. That is incredible. What a cool deal.
Before I introduce Autumn, didn't you get Presidential Medal of Science?
Yeah, the PAMST award. Yeah, the presidential of, just got that piece. So yeah, thank you.
That's the highest honor for a science educator. And I'm a little biased because I'm a former science educator, but yes.
Thanks, Ramon. Thank you.
Well, the real Autumn, like you were on fire, like literally, like you were like killing it with like awards. Just writing a book, like it's incredible. So I am Lee Perez. I am an ESL teacher at Omaha Benson High School in Omaha, Nebraska. This is my 18th year of education. I am the 2022 Nebraska Teacher of the Year. I'm a 2023 Horace Mann finalist for 2023 Horace Mann Award for Teaching Excellence finalist. And I am an adjunct professor teaching linguistics and ESL methodology at Bellevue University. Happy to be on.
Lee, this is awesome. Thank you so much. Josh and I absolutely love meeting passionate, inspirational educators, and you all certainly fit the bill. You all, on top of everything else, wrote a pretty awesome chapter in a pretty awesome book. And what struck me was the history that you all shared. And it's not just history for perspective's sakes, it's real personal. And so I don't want to give too much away, but maybe you could give us just a little flavor, a little bit of a taste of what the book purpose was, and then delve into a little bit about the chapter that you all authored.
If I can start, I can kind of give you a little background in how this all came to be, if that's okay. So it was in the summer.
We're here because of you, Mr. Lee.
No, so it was in the summer, and I got a message on Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter, X, whatever, from Dr. Villarreal. And he said, "Hey, I've been following your work for a long time. I'm getting ready to write a book. I wanted to know if you would be interested in writing a chapter. So he sent me the logistics for the book, and it was quite intense. And, I have a lot going on. We all do. And I was like thinking, oh, I want to do this, but well, I thought so I messaged him back and I said, would it be okay if I invited some really, really good friends, or I call them family, we're family, to help me write this book? And he said, absolutely. He's like, how many people would you want to invite to co-author the book? I said, there's 2 Latinx educators, one from Colorado and one from Texas, that I'm going to go ahead and speak for them that would probably do this. So he said, absolutely, just let me know by this date. And I remember texting him that day, and it wasn't even really a discussion. They both said yes.
Yeah.
And Autumn, I remember you were just like, whatever it is, I'm in. And it was funny because I was like, well, you don't even know what we're doing yet. But then I was like, well, long story short, we're going to write a chapter in a book. And so then he basically asked me what topic that we would like to discuss. And I said that I think it would be really powerful if we all shared our stories and how we use those stories with our students in our classroom and basically in the schools and the school districts that we serve. So I said, let's really dive into our immigration history, even if it's really traumatic, and kind of our linguistic history. And as you can see from the chapter, me and Autumn specifically, you see a lot of parallels with language loss and language extinction. And, I'm going to admit, and Autumn, you can kind of talk about your part, but it was really emotional for me to write that chapter of my book. I kind of teared up a few times because it really brought back some memories that were just very, very tough with my dad's immigration history and stuff like that. And yeah, it was really just a cool experience. It was a lot of work, but it was just really great keeping in touch with them. And it was just another way to connect and just share our stories, just not only with just how we do it with our students and in our classrooms, but with each other. So
Yeah, I think it was a really beautiful piece. Of course, anything to do with Ramon and Lee, like I said, sign me up. I'm in. They're amazing educators. But I think each individually were kind of teaching in islands until we were able to meet through our Teacher of the Year cohort, and we're able to form this friendship that was connected not just around love of teaching, but around just shared history that we didn't even realize was shared. I think for so many of us in the Latinx world, it can be a little isolating sometimes in the education world. And so to take a moment to be able to share that experience with other people and see my history in Colorado is very similar to Ramon and Lee's in Nebraska and Texas, and how those stories we can share. And that if that's true amongst the 3 of us, how similar then must those stories be within our students? And so it was a very powerful experience. I also got very emotional. It was a part of my history that I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about, involved me really just reflecting on who I am, and not just as a person, as an educator, and how those 2 play off of each other. And so I was really grateful to be able to be part of this book.
And I'm glad you brought that up about teaching in an island and meeting up together. So that's the way I've always looked at our friendship or family relationship here, is that there was 3 different paths, and because our love for what we do, but most important, our love for students, and being teachers of color, being Latinx teachers, and what we bring to the table is different than anybody else's. So the stories that we have, each one of us has a unique story that should be told. And being given the opportunity that we're able to tell our stories, and you combine all 3 of them together, it was emotional reading each of your stories. And we've known each other, but then when you read it on paper, you read those words, it's hard to describe how powerful words are. And just reading your story, Autumn, reading Lee, your story, and then going back and it was like, am I really doing what I need to do to tell my story? So it kind of allowed me to also to reflect, like Autumn said, reflect and look back on what I've done and what our families have gone through in order for us to be having this conversation right now. So a lot of us have had, all 3 of us have had our separate journeys, but we came together in 2022. And I see ourselves, we win our different ways, but somehow, some way, we come back together, and we always will. And it's because of these stories, and once again, our love for teaching, but most important, our love for our students.
When Tom and I go and do presentations and speak to other educators, one thing that we always try to make sure is at the forefront of our talks is the importance of sharing our stories, and how important as educators it is for us to spread the personal side and the professional side of what we're doing in our lives. I'm curious, does that translate into your classroom as well? Do you share these stories with your students and get vulnerable with them, or is there a boundary there, I guess, or you know what I'm trying to ask?
I know exactly what you're saying, Josh. I think about when I first started teaching, like I vividly remember a professor being like, you do not talk about your personal life with your students. Like there is a line. And it took me a while to be like, that's not actually correct. Like you really need to share like who I am as a human. Like we need to humanize
Yeah.
ourselves as teachers and humanize our students. And by doing that is sharing who we are. Like we don't need a therapy session with our students, but like sharing what's going on with our students is really important, and having those moments of being human so they can see that they can also be human with us. And that's what's beautiful about this chapter is we're writing about how sharing our stories with our students is helping build those connections, and really help make it be a realistic moment. Like I'm currently working, I know that Ramon just got his doctorate. I'm in the process of working on that right now, because not because it's something that I necessarily want, but I want my students to be able to see that it is possible.
Yeah.
It is possible for someone that looks like them, for someone who looks like me, to also find themselves in higher academia.
Yeah,
And
and
you,
just
you hit it right on the spot, Autumn. That's one of my things that I tell these young teachers coming in is like, how do I do this? How do I be vulnerable in the classroom? I say, do enough to show them that you're human. You don't have to, have those therapy sessions, or you don't have to tell them everything, but just show them that you also have problems. You also have problems with yourself. You have problems with, people you live with, people outside, and you also have problems with stuff that's happening around the world and how it affects you. So, but as a teacher, the limit is showing up that you're human. And that's what I've always lived by when I was in the classroom, and I still do as an administrator. Even when parents come in, sometimes I have my son in my own class. I have my son at my own high school, and I'm talking to parents about their kids and why they're in my office. Sometimes I'll tell them I'm taking off the AP hat, I'm putting on the dad hat. My son's here, same school your kid's at, and I understand what you're going through. And I tell them enough to show that I'm still a parent. I'm not just an AP, but that helps out a lot in building those relationships with parents and students now.
yeah, and it teaches kids to overcome trauma, struggle,
Mhm.
failure, conflict, resolution. Like, yeah, I mean, it's just honestly, I think, and to add on to Autumn's point, yeah, I had professors tell me the same thing. Like,
Mhm.
talk about things like that, but you have to understand when I graduated, this was 20 years ago when I graduated with my bachelor's. Things are vastly different in this world now, geopolitically. So I always tell teachers, be as transparent as possible. Again, it's not a therapy session. It's more of a teachable moment of, hey, like,
Exactly.
these are some of the huge struggles that my family went through. And these are the struggles that I personally went through, like, for example, like with alcoholism and substance abuse, and lots of families and students go through similar issues. And they talk about this huge dichotomy of, oh, well, yeah, we go through that too, but can I still be successful? Can I still graduate high school? Can I still go to college? Can I still go to trade school? Can I still get a job and, raise a family and do all the things I need to do to be a productive person in a 21st century world? And the answer to those questions are yes, because look at my story and look at all the trials and tribulations I went through. And I'm the last person to throw stones at anybody, because
Yeah,
I have literally
I
been
agree with
in jail. That's literally you don't get any more rock bottom than that. When kids hear that, it is like super inspirational, because some of them say, well, maybe my life isn't as bad as I think it is. Or even if it is, if Mr. Perez can overcome all these obstacles, then so can I.
Mhm.
Sharing stories is absolutely powerful. It's healing. It's empowering. One thing that struck me in each of your stories was like the struggle of immigration, and sometimes the struggle, but also like the the after effects of a struggle, of having your language literally beaten out of you,
Yeah.
um, and the consequences of that, not just on the individual experiencing that trauma, but the trauma that then travels from generation to generation. Um, that was just really incredible. And I think in today's geopolitical climate, you have to be conscious of, in my opinion, some of the struggles that immigrant children, are going through, especially in today's really politically charged climate. How would we what would you recommend if a teacher is trying to do their best at taking care of children, immigrant children, that may be experiencing trauma as a result of some of the geopolitical um, things happening right now?
I think there's a lot of trauma in all students. Unfortunately, we all are having different
Yeah, I
backgrounds.
agree. Mhm.
I think there are students that are going through a lot of trauma just with in trying to get to safe spaces and being in situations, being close to families. The stories that my students share when they
Mhm.
come here are just, like, and I'm supposed to expect you to just sit and learn science right now.
Mhm.
Like, no, I want you to have a safe space. I want that to be a place. So I think step one is just providing a safe space and knowing that that place is safe, and that when they come into your walls, they can be who they need to be, and that you'll be respecting that. I think a lot of it is also, like you said, that the generational trauma, the generational pieces that are passed down that maybe are not always aware. I think one piece that was really powerful for me in writing this story is really, it was the first time I got to reflect on there's this whole history of my side of my dad's family I never got to connect with, a huge part because I didn't speak the language and what that looked like and how that is still a piece that I'm still working with. So I think there's the current trauma and also the generational trauma that you need to really help and focus with your students on.
Lee, or
Oh, I
so
thought you
I'll, just to follow up on that. I didn't know about growing up in South Texas. It was Spanish, and my first language was Spanish. I was, my parents had to work, so we had a little house behind my grandparents' house. So my parents were at work, we were at my grandparents' house. Grandparents didn't have, probably I'm more than likely they probably didn't even finish elementary school, so they just spoke Spanish. But they were able to read and write, but they just spoke Spanish. They wrote in Spanish, so my first language was in Spanish. So I grew up with Spanish, and then being what they call Tex-Mex, it turned into Spanglish, and I carry that with me, and I still do. But when I moved to El Paso, and when I met my wife and her brothers, uh, they weren't really fluent in Spanish, is because their parents, when they were growing up in El Paso, were told they couldn't speak Spanish, and I had never heard of that. I had never heard of that at all, and
Hmm.
that was new to me. And I started learning more about it and what they went through. So her parents are fluent in Spanish because they were raised that way. But then my wife and my in-laws, my brother-in-laws, weren't that fluent because they since they were told you can't speak it, we're gonna speak the way it is here, only English only, and that was just something new to me. And it was that in itself, being told that you can't speak the language of your family or that language of your roots, that in itself is trauma alone. And you don't see it as a kid, but as now that my wife's grown up, she reflects on it. And now with our sons, we're trying our best to teach them Spanish, and in order for them to be bilingual, as hopefully it'll help them out in the future.
Yeah, just to add on to Ramon's point, like the language loss is huge. Like I can definitely empathize with Autumn. My daughter right now, she is a simultaneous bilingual, which means she's learning English and Spanish at the same time. But you have a huge, and this is just a historical thing, you have a huge English only initiative going on in this country right now. And a lot of it is charged by political divisiveness. But I always just kind of go back to a Supreme Court case that comes from Nebraska, and that is Meyer versus Nebraska in 1943. And just a little linguistic constitutional history. Basically, in that Supreme Court case, Meyer was a teacher at a small Lutheran school here in rural Nebraska. He was teaching a foreign language. He was teaching German. People were upset about that, and ultimately it went to the state Supreme Court, and then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court justices ruled, and I quote, that English-only initiatives are unconstitutional. And so that's just a little like language history that a lot of people don't understand, is like this is something that was literally struck down by the Supreme Court, that English-only initiatives are unconstitutional, and that multilingualism is as American as anything that you can think of that would be characterized as American. And when I teach my linguistics and language education classes at Bellevue University, I specifically go over that Supreme Court case with my future students that are going to be teachers in ESL and TESOL. And in addition to that, I also teach my students that Supreme Court case. So some of my higher level academic ELs, we actually go over Meyer versus Nebraska, because unfortunately, there are students that come up to me that tell them that they've had people that tell them to speak English only, that they shouldn't be speaking Spanish, whatever language that is. And I just kind of go over the facts of the matter that, this was something that was settled in the 1920s, that it was unconstitutional according to the United States Supreme Court. So, yeah, it's just, but even with that, even when you provide, I would say, these cold hard facts on language education, you still have English only initiatives. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that you don't hear people talking about it. You don't, my wife is telling me that she saw a video today where two women in a subway in New York were being berated for speaking German, literally the language of German that I just got done talking about. So it's a constant struggle. But again, when you read our book, when you read the chapter in the book that we all co-authored, literally, if I could describe our chapter in one word, it's struggle. So just because things get hard, we have to teach our students to overcome that struggle. And in that chapter, one of the main prominent talking points is language. So
that was a lot. And thank you to all three of you for sharing that. I have so many directions that I want to go down, because we started talking about how politically charged our climate is right now. And as educators, at least I feel like we have to walk on eggshells with the way that with what we handle, the way that we handle things. Like last year, I was accused of indoctrinating kids, which is not something that I'm doing at all. I barely have time to keep up with my pacing guide. And so then I don't want to blame everything on what's happened recently with the election, but then we've got the students in our classes that are people of color that are scared, and rightfully so. I think even back to 2016, when I was teaching fourth grade, I had a little girl give me a hug on November 6th, crying because she was worried about what was going to happen to her family. And they were here legally. But because of the hate that has started to fill our nation, we have kids walking in scared every day, which is heartbreaking to me. And then it becomes heartbreaking listening to your guys' stories, and as a white educator, not knowing the best way to be culturally responsive to them. So I guess my next question, the road I'd like to go down, do you have any advice for Tom and I, for the white educators that want to be there for our students? How do we help them best? I know, Autumn, you were talking about safe spaces, making sure that they know that they're loved and cared for. Do you have any other advice for us, or ways that we navigate?
If I may, because I'm just I have a history certification, so I know this stuff. It's weird. It comes natural, like brushing my teeth. But again, some more constitutional history. So right now there is some controversy with immigration customs enforcement with sensitive locations such as churches, schools, hospitals, and the current administration has said that ICE does have the right to go into sensitive locations. And if you know, back in 2011, under the Obama administration, the Department of Homeland Security basically deemed those places as basically safe spaces from any type of immigration raid based on immigration status. Well, in 1982, there was a Supreme Court case out of Texas that went to the United States Supreme Court called Plyer versus Doe. And ultimately, the outcome of that case basically said, regardless of immigration status, and this is key for those of you that are listening to this podcast, regardless of immigration status, the justices ruled that every single kid has the right to a free public school education. And in addition to that, they also have a right to feel safe in school. So Plyer versus Doe, 1982, law of the land, United States Supreme Court ruled every child has access, regardless of immigration status, to a free public school education, and every child has a right to feel safe while getting that free public school education.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think in reality, though, my school sent out an email yesterday to all parents telling them, like, here's what you need to do in case ICE comes to your door. Here's how you prepare. Here's what we will do as a school. We've had trainings. We've talked about it. I think it's a real situation. And I think as well, Josh, in 2016, like, it was the first year I taught social studies, ironically, and we were teaching about the election. And I remember a student just looking at me the next day with just fear in his eye. And it's still like that fear in his eyes still haunt me. Like it still haunts me to this day because it was a legit fear that no kid should have to feel when they're in sixth grade. That's not what their sixth grade should be about. And so I think no matter what your background is, no matter if you're a teacher of color, if you're a white teacher, it doesn't matter. I think that safe space, I think letting students know that you're here for them, that they're safe, checking in with students, not making it be all about the whole situation, but really having there just be a moment of like, hey, are you okay? Those just noticings and being aware. I talk a lot about at least in middle school, there's a lot that happens in the hallways of just like watching and seeing how kids interact with each other, don't interact with each other when they normally do. And so just being aware of what's said, but also being aware of what's not said and how you can make those connections, and just knowing they have a trusted adult is really going to go a long way for students. So how can you create situations to let them know? I know John Arthur, the 2021 Utah State Teacher of the Year, talks about how in his school, he was not allowed to in any way show support for his queer students. And so he began to wear the rainbow colored pens in his pocket. And that was the best way he could show, like, I'm still going to be this trusted adult for you, and I'm just going to do that piece. And so whether it's a small piece like that or a larger piece, whatever you can do to let those students know that you're there, I think is really going to be important, especially in the next years to come.
Indeed.
And here in El Paso, it's unique because we are right on the border. So a majority of our schools, I grew up right on the border as well in Brownsville, Texas. Matamoros is a sister city here. It's Juarez. A lot of our students come from Mexico. They're from Juarez. Every day they wake up 3-4 in the morning just to cross that bridge and be at school by 7 o'clock, 7:30 for them to get breakfast. There's buses, private buses that individuals privately own, and they pick up students at the bridge and bring them on over to our school. So I'm glad you brought that up, because when in the first election, my son was scared, and we asked him, "Why are you scared?" And he was, "It's not for me, Dad. It's because of my friends." Because he's been in our feeder pattern, and our school is literally about 1.5 miles away from the bridge, from the border. So a lot, like I said, a lot of our students in the community we live in has deep roots to Juarez, and it's hard. It's hard now with the geopolitical climate that we have in place. I fear for our kids, and we also received an email as admin: if ICE or any other law enforcement shows up, hold them in your office and until we send our legal counsel down to speak to them. You don't need to say anything to them. Just say you're waiting for admin from central office to show up, and just keep them occupied. Don't let them into the school. And that was, I came home and I told my wife about it. It was a huge advocate too for education and students of color, especially our kids from Juarez. And it was heartbreaking just to know that now they have to send emails like that because of this transition we're going to be going into.
It's absolutely astounding to me that, I don't know, that we're expected to teach, we're expected to grow humans, we're expected to demonstrate love, and at the same time have everything that was just talked about going on. Keep that in front of mind as well. I'm encouraged to hear the three of you and the passion and just the love of teaching, the love of humanity that you share. And I'm even more encouraged when you say we used to be silos, but now we're family. And I think in today's society, we need more of that. I think as educators, we need to stand together. We need to stand up for what's right. We need to raise our collective voice. And the three of you are just absolutely shining examples of doing that. And I can't thank you enough from one educator to another.
Well, if I may interject, Tom, one of the reasons why we wrote this book is because when you look at the geopolitical climate, I mean, let's be transparent with each other. None of this is normal. I mean, none of this, getting emails about immigration raids and about what happens, none of this is normal. So like when writing this book, I literally laid out everything that I could think of that would support my students in the best possible way. Because I mean, when I looked at my immigration history, I'm kind of the historian in my family. I found out that some of my family were undocumented immigrants, you know, a few decades ago. So, I mean, that's kind of a boat that I've actually been in with some of my immediate family in my direct immigration history. Is like I actually had family members of mine that were not considered legal residents of the United States of America. So I didn't talk about that in the book, but I mean, I kind of alluded to that. I was kind of like giving subtle hints, but you know, that's part of the reason why I asked Autumn and Ramon to write this book, is because, you know, I knew there was an election coming up, and I knew that there was the potential that unfortunately something like this could happen. And so I kind of wanted to get ahead of it.
Well, Tom, I've been super inspired. For a little bit there, I was almost in tears. I feel heartbroken that we are in the place that we're at, and that kids do come to our schools, unfortunately, with things heavier on their heart than they need to be. Like, I told my kids the other day that we're stressing about a test, like, guys, you got to remember, you're 11 years old, right? Your job is to have fun, be kids, go home, play with your friends, do some studying, hang out with your family, but be a kid. And I feel like so many of our kids, unfortunately, are now missing out on that because of the fear and the trauma that's being put wrongfully on them. So I don't know. I thank you guys for being here with us and sharing with us your wisdom and your stories, and your passion. At the end of every episode, we always need to know what the world needs now. And Tom, I gotta be honest, I'm super excited for this one because I know that there's going to be some great answers that come. Back in the 60s, the world needed love. We're, I don't know what, 40, 60 years out from that, 65 years. Oh my goodness, 65 years out from that. Things change. In your guys' opinion, whether it's education related or a broader scope of the world, what does the world need now?
I'll keep it simple. The world needs a hug. And you know, sometimes when you have your kids and you see your kids in the classroom, and you know they're talking to you, you see the pain, the struggle. You see what you felt as a kid, and especially in my sense, because I work in a community that I grew up. I grew up in a similar community like that near the border. I lived about 6 blocks away from the U.S.-Mexico border. Lived in a 2-bedroom house. Poverty was all around us, and that's kind of the same community that I work in. So when I see my kids, I see my younger self. So sometimes they just need that hug, and right now I believe that's all the world needs right now is a hug.
Ramon, I saw an awesome quote the other day, and it was, "Don't give a lecture to a kid that just needs a hug."
Yeah, I agree.
I think.
Go ahead, Autumn.
I'm wavering between two ideas, but I'm gonna settle on, I think what the world needs right now is connection. And I think connection just in human to human, of just who you are and what you're about. I was caught up in the TikTok ban and switched over to Red Note for a little bit and was just loving the connections I was making with people all over the world and getting to see just how different people live and celebrating those differences. And I think when we spend so much time in our own echo chamber, it can seem a little bit like everyone feels the same way, lives the same way, has the same feelings. And it also can be a very isolating world, just like I explained before, how I felt like my story was unique and no one needed to hear it because it was just a silly story. And then all of a sudden I meet Lee and Ramon and realize that it's not a simple story. It's a very common story that people need to hear. And so through that connection, I think we're going to be able to hopefully really move forward into, I'm really hopeful for a brighter future.
Same here.
I love the connection. I love that you all are models of connection. It's not just a loose concept to you all. It is something you live out and you model for us. So thank you.
And real quick, before I do mine, I just want to say, like, when I was writing this and we were going through the editing process, and writing a book is actually a lot of work. I was like, oh God, I was like, this is semi-stressful, but I was like, I was just kind of reading like their stories, and I I got to know Ramon and Autumn during our State Teacher of the Year journey in 2022. But then again, it was just kind of like an iceberg. I only learned like the surface part of these amazing educators that I got to know during our year of service. But when we actually wrote this chapter, and they started telling their stories, I literally got to see the bottom of the iceberg, and I learned things about them I didn't even know. And they learned things about me that they didn't know. And so it was just kind of like, oh my God, Autumn, like, sister, like we literally have the same experience with our dads. And then, oh my God, Ramon, my wife has definitely experienced what you and your family went through. And it's just, so what the world needs now is this quote. And I love this quote because it's simple and it's just straight to the point. It's nice to be great, but it is far greater to be nice. And I'll end with that.
Well said.
Josh, I love that quote.
Me too. It reminds me of, if you've ever read the book Wonder, August Pullman in there gives a great quote that, and now it's going to slip me, so Tom, you're going to have to edit it. But
That's all right.
I really like too. When given the choice between being right and being kind, choose kind. That's his quote. Reminds me of that.
And I like the idea. I heard a keynote speaker one time talk about how kindness is not something, like he doesn't like the poster that says throw kindness around like confetti, because that makes it seem like it's an accidental thing, and kindness is purposeful, and how you have to make the choice to be kind. And it really, I just really stuck with me, that idea of like, you have to choose to be kind. You have to choose to do that piece, and we should choose that always. So yeah, thanks for sharing that quote.
Lee, Autumn, Ramon, thank you so much for being generous with your time. Thank you so much
Thank you all for having us here.
Sharing your stories with the world and inspiring the world. Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks you.
For having me, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our show. We're so thankful and appreciative that you took your time to listen to Lee Perez, Autumn Rivera, and Ramon Benavides on What the World Needs Now, sponsored by Harmony Academy from National University. Please be sure to follow What the World Needs Now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. We hope that as you head out, you remember that the biggest factor that plays into student success is you. Your love, your passion, your empathy, your dedication is exactly what the world needs now. Thank you for all you do. Have a good one.